Sometime in 2025, a Chinese government procurement document was quietly updated. 9 domestic artificial intelligence chips appeared on the approved list. One name disappeared entirely: Nvidia. The bullish camp read that as a declaration of arrival. Years of export controls, sanctions pressure, and forced domestication had produced a homegrown silicon fleet capable of carrying the state's artificial intelligence workload at national scale. The skeptical camp read it as something more cautious. A list can exclude anything, but exclusion does not manufacture performance, and banning the market leader from a procurement catalog does not promote the challengers into its category. Both readings are reasonable. Both cannot be fully right. 3 rounds settle the question. Volume first, then the policy lever, then the word "ready" itself, placed under examination. The procurement list is the contested object in every round. It is simultaneously the bullish exhibit and the skeptical target, a document that functions as state validation in one reading and as political theater in another. The scorecard will follow the evidence, not the flag. Volume is where the bullish camp opens its strongest hand. Industry estimates tracking China's artificial intelligence server market put roughly 1.65 million domestically produced artificial intelligence processors into local server shipments across 2025. That figure represents approximately 41% of China's total artificial intelligence server deployments for the year. The bullish argument is simple and not wrong. 41% is not a roadmap slide, not a factory tour, not a ministry announcement. It is silicon already seated in running machines, already drawing power, already executing workloads inside a national infrastructure. When 2/5 of your country's artificial intelligence server fleet is already running domestic processors before the procurement policy is formalized, the policy is not taking a risk. It is ratifying something that already happened in the field. The Homegrown 9 have the shipment numbers to stand behind the exclusion. The skeptical counterclaim arrives immediately and deserves its hearing. Shipment volume and operational equivalence are different measurements, and conflating them is the bullish camp's primary sleight of hand. A server containing a domestic chip has been logged, shipped, and installed. It has not necessarily run a frontier training workload, processed a large-scale inference job at competitive throughput, or matched the output a buyer would have received from the excluded alternative. Volume at 41% certifies that the domestic supply chain can produce processors at scale, stock warehouses, and fill purchase orders. It does not certify that those processors performed at parity with what they replaced. The bullish argument is citing a manufacturing and logistics achievement and presenting it as a performance certification, and those are not the same credential. The evidence supports a narrower conclusion than either camp states cleanly. The 41% figure, if the industry estimates hold, is a genuine supply chain story, and it is a more impressive one than many export control architects anticipated on this timeline. China's domestic artificial intelligence chip ecosystem moved from marginal presence to roughly 2/5 of national server shipments in a compressed window. That scaling pace is not trivial, and dismissing it as mere volume misses how hard volume is to achieve in advanced semiconductor packaging and system integration. The 59%, however, is the counterweight the bullish camp tends to elide. At the moment the procurement list was updated, the majority of China's artificial intelligence server shipments still did not use domestic chips. The Homegrown 9 held a strong minority position, not a dominant one, and the buyers who chose non-domestic chips in that 59% were not making a random selection. Round 1 goes to the bullish side, but the margin matters. 1.65 million chips at 41% is a supply chain fact with enough mass to underpin a procurement policy. It is not a performance verdict. That distinction will come back in round 3 with full force. Government procurement lists do not only reflect reality, they create it. That is the bullish case in round 2, and it is structurally sound. When a state document names 9 specific domestic processors and removes Nvidia, it does something no engineering team can accomplish unilaterally. It guarantees demand at scale. In the semiconductor business, captive government procurement is the most reliable revenue a chip company can receive. It is revenue that does not depend on winning a benchmark comparison, does not require outperforming an incumbent, and does not evaporate when a competitor announces a better product. Guaranteed revenue funds the next generation of silicon. It attracts senior engineering talent who need confidence. The company will exist in 5 years. It collapses the risk premium that makes institutional investors hesitant about betting on challengers in markets dominated by an entrenched leader. The procurement list, in this reading, does not just exclude Nvidia. It simultaneously finances the domestic stack at a scale that years of venture subsidy and industrial grants struggled to reach consistently. One policy document accomplishes what patient capital alone could not. The skeptical response is structurally important and should not be brushed aside. Captive demand is not competitive demand. When a chipmaker's primary customer is legally required to purchase its product, the pricing signal distorts, and the performance signal distorts with it. The domestic producers on the list do not need to exceed Nvidia's capabilities to win the government contract. They need to remain on the approved list, which is a different optimization target. That target produces a different kind of chip industry, well-funded, insulated from import competition, and partially shielded from the performance discipline that has historically driven the processor market toward successive generations of improvement. The policy lever that finances the Homegrown 9 also partially decouples them from the pressure that would make them genuinely world-class at the frontier. Captive buyers do not punish underperformance the way competitive buyers do, and that insulation is a long-run liability dressed as a short-run benefit. The evidence leans toward the bullish position here, but with the skeptical caveat held in reserve. China's industrial policy has used procurement mandates effectively in other hardware categories. Domestically produced display panels, storage media, and networking equipment all moved from minority to dominant share in state procurement within roughly a decade of targeted mandate. The artificial intelligence chip case is more demanding because processor performance is more precisely measurable and more directly consequential to the buyer's own output. A state agency purchasing domestic storage equipment accepts a marginal latency difference with limited downstream consequence. A research institute purchasing domestic artificial intelligence chips for a large-scale model training run will observe a training time difference that affects its research calendar and its resource budget. Whether the 9 listed chips are close enough to the performance ceiling to make the mandate operationally painless is a question the list itself does not answer, and the precedents from display panels and storage devices do not fully transfer. Round 2 goes to the bullish side. Government procurement is the most powerful non-technical accelerant available to a chip ecosystem, and the list deploys it at a moment when the domestic volume base from round 1 can absorb the demand without supply collapse. The distortion risk is genuine, but second order at this stage of the contest. Now, the word on trial. Ready is doing more work in this debate than any other term, and round 3 is where that work gets audited. The bullish camp's reading of ready is instrumentally reasonable. Readiness does not require perfection. It requires fitness for purpose. If 41% of China's artificial intelligence server shipments were already running domestic chips before the list was formalized, then ready simply means ready enough that the state is no longer willing to allow a foreign company to hold a veto over the nation's artificial intelligence infrastructure. In procurement terms, readiness is a policy threshold, not a benchmark score. The 9 chips cross that threshold, and the list reflects the crossing. The skeptical case is strongest here, and it earns the space to be stated fully. 41% share means 59% of artificial intelligence server shipments in 2025 still did not use domestic chips, and those servers almost certainly concentrated at the performance-demanding end of the market, because buyers choosing between domestic and non-domestic options under less than mandatory conditions tend to select the non-domestic option precisely when the workload is most demanding and the cost of underperformance is highest. The procurement list does not redistribute Nvidia's capabilities when it redistributes Nvidia's contracts. The research institutes and state enterprises that required frontier-level throughput for the most demanding training workloads do not suddenly have access to equivalent domestic performance after the list update. They have access to a mandate. A government document cannot manufacture what an independent benchmark would need to confirm. Consider what the mandate actually transfers to the buyer: a legal obligation, not a capability upgrade. Think of it the way a governed athletic competition handles equipment rules. A regulation that bans the fastest available option does not make the domestic option faster. It makes competing in the domestic option the only available outcome. The buyers on China's state procurement system are now running the domestic option regardless of the race they are signed up for. The software ecosystem compounds the hardware question in ways the volume numbers do not capture. Nvidia's CUDA platform has accumulated years of optimized libraries, developer tooling, and model training frameworks built specifically around its architecture. Entire research communities have built workflows, debugging practices, and optimization intuitions on top of that stack. The domestic chips on the list must either execute software originally written for a different architecture, with the friction and performance loss that transition entails, or operate on a parallel domestic software stack that is maturing but not yet equivalent in depth. Neither path is frictionless, and software friction translates directly into engineering hours and training costs that raw hardware specifications do not capture. The benchmark gap, whatever its size, is not the whole gap. The three strongest reasons this skeptical verdict could be wrong deserve direct engagement before the ruling. First, the performance gap may be narrower than the software friction implies. Software gaps close faster than process node gaps. If the domestic chip companies can attract the engineering talent to port and optimize the leading artificial intelligence frameworks to their architectures, a documented priority for several firms named in the domestic procurement ecosystem, the practical throughput difference narrows even without closing the underlying silicon gap. The verdict could be premature if software convergence happens faster than the current benchmark picture suggests. Second, the absence of independent frontier-level benchmarks cuts both ways. Round 3 was partly awarded on missing evidence. Credible third-party head-to-head comparisons between the 9 listed chips and Nvidia's excluded products at large model training scale are sparse in the public record as of mid-2025. Absence of confirmation is not confirmation of absence. If such a benchmark were published, the round verdicts could shift in either direction. The gap is analyst consensus, not measured fact. Third, mandatory procurement with technically demanding buyers may impose its own performance pressure from inside the system rather than eliminating it. State research institutes forced onto domestic chips and experiencing throughput shortfalls have both the technical sophistication to document those shortfalls precisely and the institutional standing inside the policy system to escalate them. The captive demand distortion flagged in round 2 may be less severe than the structural argument implies because the buyers are not passive. Those 3 points share a structure. Each identifies a dynamic: software velocity, benchmark absence, internal demand pressure that could make the skeptical verdict wrong on a faster timeline than the current evidence supports. Taken together, they do not overturn the round. They establish that the timeline is genuinely uncertain, which is a different and more honest conclusion than declaring the domestic chip story either a triumph or a failure. Round 3 goes to the skeptics. The word ready is carrying more weight than the evidence at the high end supports. The list excludes Nvidia. It does not replace Nvidia's peak capabilities. Mandating a transition and completing a transition are separate achievements, and the procurement document cannot distinguish between them. The scorecard reads 2-1 in favor of the bullish camp on momentum. The Homegrown 9 have the volume, the policy backing, and the mid-tier operational record to justify the procurement decision on its own terms. What they do not yet have, on the available public evidence, is confirmed parity at the frontier level where the most consequential artificial intelligence workloads run. The list is simultaneously a true statement and an overreach. True about the 41%, premature about the top tier. The deeper irony in this contest is structural. The export controls and procurement bans that were supposed to contain China's semiconductor trajectory instead became the conditions that accelerated the domestic ecosystem to mid-tier sufficiency faster than the policy architects modeled. The restriction reopened the question it was meant to close, and it has been reopening it at each successive turn. China is now using its own ban on Nvidia to do what the earlier foreign controls were designed to do to China, which is force a national transition onto the available domestic option. The difference is that China's available domestic option actually ships at scale, actually seats in running servers, and actually handles a substantial portion of the state's current artificial intelligence workload. Whether it runs at frontier scale, whether ready is the right word for the race that actually determines artificial intelligence leadership, is the round the Homegrown 9 still have to win, and the procurement list cannot win it for them. 9 chips on a government list is a real number. The question is, whether it is the number that settles the contest or whether the number that matters most is still the one that was just removed from the page. Which round would you flip? If you have seen independent benchmark data at frontier training scale that changes the verdict on round 3, put it in the comments. That is the specific exhibit this analysis is waiting for. And if round-by-round adjudication is how you want to follow the semiconductor contest as it develops, subscribe and turn on notifications because the next verdict is already in progress.